Welcome to the Further Light Podcast, presented by Wisconsin Freemasonry, helping you accomplish your Masonic goals through education and more light. And now, I present to you, Brother Chris Ludke.
Listeners, scholars, brothers, this is Brother Chris Ludke, and today I want to explore the lectures, and I want to give a little bit of background before I jump into this. I've learned some of the lectures in the past. I learned them from a character that we all have in our lodges, that guy, that old guy who knows all of the parts, and originally sat there and found every flaw with my performance. We've all been there. And that was 19 years ago, and I still remember those lessons for that lecture, which I've been giving for, 19 years. But I wanted to do something else. For the entire first season of the Further Light podcast, we have dealt rather a lot with the middle chamber, with the lessons, with the ideas, and I figured it was about time that I learned that lecture. What I want to do here is both explore some of the ideas of the lectures, but also go through my journey of learning it, because as of end of April, early May, somewhere in there, I volunteered to learn the middle chamber. And this is not a short lecture. It's generally considered to be one of the more difficult pieces. There is no narrative that connects it. There are no slides to give prompting, and large portions of it are fairly esoteric. It's a mix of rote memorization and little bits of prompting here and there. So I want to look at that as the background for what I'm dealing with in the lectures. I'm recording this on Thursday, May 25th. It's probably going out well after that. But the date is important because later on today, it is currently about 8 in the morning. At about 7:30 tonight, I will be giving this lecture for the first time. The nerves are up. I'm well caffeinated. Let's get into it. And I should point out that this lecture is not short. None of them are. But this one is about 1,700 words. To give you an idea, it's about a 15-minute piece, and that's a lot of material to memorize. And of course, memorizing Masonic ritual has long been an important part of carrying on the work of Freemasonry. Those that masterfully perform Masonic lectures have long been revered as prestigious members of the fraternity and have been pointed out as men worthy of emulation. It's kind of an interesting idea because as generations change, as time changes, as people are expected to put in more hours at work or at home or elsewhere, the expectation of Masonry hasn't changed. And maybe that's not a bad thing. However, while many Masons have relished the opportunity to memorize one of the lectures, many have avoided such undertakings, and my point here is not to tell you why that is wrong. Rather, it's to tell you why we should take a more positivist approach to it. In modern times, it isn't unusual to hear a Mason say things like, "I sure wish I could perform lectures like that," or "I'm going to memorize this lecture one of these days," without ever taking the actual time to do so. And you run into the smoker's problem. "Well, I'll quit tomorrow. I'll start it tomorrow." And then 20 years later of tomorrows, and you're still here in the same spot. Some cite the inability to memorize, which is tricky because our posting is based on memorization, which in some cases may be true, and others simply claim they don't have time. In fact, there have been movements and different elements of the Grand Lodge and elsewhere to break up the lectures or allow them to be broken up amongst multiple members, and maybe that's not the best idea. Maybe what we need is to find the time, and we're going to talk about that. But I have several sources I'm dealing with today. Some of the material here comes from other places. Some of it is mine. It's all intermixed. My sources are FreemasonInformation.com. There's an article by Michael Mayer that I'm using, and then my own personal experience, having given one of the lectures for the better part of 19 years and learned under the tutelage of one Henry Peinecker and one Jim Fleming, and I still hear their voices in the back of my head. But I want to look at some other issues when we come to the lectures. So let's start here. Why do we lecture? Why do we do this? Why not just give the ritual and let the candidate figure it out? Well, in all Masonic degrees, the lecture contains a vast amount of information that explains the ritual. In the 3 degrees, the lectures actually contain a majority of the information given to the candidate in that degree. Like with all orations, the listener retains very little, which kind of makes us wonder why we do it. Think about your first degree. Think about any of your degrees. How much did you actually remember? The degree probably took anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours, depending on what you're doing. And there was a huge amount of information. Everything that happens there is symbolic. Everything that happens there is a lesson. The likelihood is you didn't catch all of it. Even when a kindly older brother, or millennial in my case, stands there and explains to you what you've just been through, the likelihood is you don't remember it. And so this gets into the question of why we learn the lectures, because it's almost like the posting. We need to learn those lessons at a deeper level. By memorizing the degrees and obligations, we share something no one else can possibly understand. It's a common memory. It's a common experience amongst us. The task of learning them, which we choose to do, is something we did. In other words, the task of learning the lectures is something that we can take pride in. The struggle teaches us what we all can do with hard work and a true desire to accomplish things. It is the ultimate pragmatic application of time, patience, and perseverance, accomplishing all things. The Mason that has memorized a lecture has its teachings impressed upon his mind and his heart. The slightest reference to symbolism from the lecture will bring an explanation of Masonry's allegories to the front of his mind. How many times have we spoken to an older member or any member, and suddenly they quote something from ritual, and the ability to do that is often tied to your knowledge of that ritual, which means the knowledge of the lectures. A person that has not learned a lecture can never fully understand the information that's there, that's memorized. No matter how many times you look at it, at some point you have to memorize it, because that memorization puts it in an order that was put in probably by Preston, maybe someone else, over several hundred years. And it's there for a reason. It expedites and enhances Masonic study and often serves as a reminder when we are about to do something of an un-Masonic nature. There's also another benefit to memorizing ritual. Most regard their passage through the degrees as one of the most impressive and influential experiences of their life. However, there's an experience that supersedes receiving the degrees, and that is conferring the degrees. Most Masonic lecturers have had the special experience when they see the light of Freemasonry shining in the eyes of men to which they are reciting the ritual. To see this new candidate get it is an incredible feeling. And by the way, usually they get it later on. I've rarely seen too many candidates who get it at that point where I see them, because everything they've been through, they've got all that information plus what I'm giving, and now they're in information overload. I would argue that perhaps the best thing to do with lectures is to do them as part of ritual and then do them later, one-on-one, with an explanation of meaning to the candidate. Leaving that aside, it is the most fulfilling of any opportunity afforded in the fraternity. Now, that being said, learning a lecture is, of course, hard work. Contrary to the misconception by many that those that learn the lectures just read them once and are able to perform them, most will take an enormous amount of time to memorize large parts, some spending months, some weeks, some days, memorizing the work and perfecting their recitation. And I would argue here that no one perfects it the first time around. In fact, again, I'm supposed to give this lecture for the first time tonight. My outlook, my goal is not perfection. My goal is to get through it and do well enough that the candidate doesn't recognize any issues that may or may not exist. But the work is worth it, and learning a bit of Masonic ritual is like riding a bike. You never lose the ability to perform it, and I can tell you that this is definitely the case. How can I tell you that? Because I went through a span of about 5 years, I didn't give one of the lectures, and then learning it again instead of taking several days or a couple of weeks took a matter of hours. That material is still there. It still hangs in the back, and I can't tell you the number of times I've been driving around or walking around kind of bored, and I just start rattling through it. It sounds weird. Maybe I'm a strange person. Maybe it's, how I function, but it does happen. The key to becoming motivated to memorize ritual is simple. Learn it for your own benefit. You are not learning it for the lodge. You're not doing it for Brother A.B., Alan Bradley, whatever, coming into the lodge. You're doing it for yourself. What do I mean by this? Well, at the end of the day, when you learn a lecture, you start to learn the symbolism of the ritual, the language of the ritual, the organization of it. What is it getting at? You can't just rote memorize something without actually starting to understand it. And so that becomes particularly important because when you understand it, it's going to make your life a lot easier. To illustrate this, think about a lecture that you have not memorized, and then consider how much of that lecture you can actually recall. You might be able to recall large portions, but more than likely, you're missing some of the most important elements. And chances are you're not recalling a lot. In order to properly grasp the degrees of Masonry, learning the lecture is going to be essential. Remember, you experience the degrees once, but we learn from them for a lifetime. So, how do you learn the lectures? Well, it depends. A lot of people do it in different ways. I can only speak from my own experience, which I know is not the same as everyone else's. I tend to be one of those people. I have ADHD. I don't really have that attentiveness all the time. And so what I do is I volunteer for something. It creates a deadline, just like I did for this lecture. And I started looking at the lecture maybe 4 or 5 days ago. And I've started working on it. I put in 2 or 3 hours a couple days ago. I put in about 4 hours, give or take, yesterday. I'll put in about 4 to 6 hours, maybe 8 hours today. And that seems really intense. Now, first of all, I work a job where I have a pretty flexible schedule. So as long as I get the work done, no one really cares if I take 8 hours off on one day. As long as I do the work elsewhere, it's irrelevant. But my expectation is in terms of overall time just memorizing, it's going to take in the realm of 12 to 14 hours in this case for the middle chamber. It might be less when there's a narrative. And the first time that I learned one of those narrative lectures, it probably took less than 6 hours for the first time I gave it, but then I've done it numerous times since, and I've studied it each time since for several hours. And so that adds up to the point where suddenly everything works out. How do I memorize it? Usually, for most parts, I simply memorize one sentence at a time. First sentence. Once I get that right and I can do it 3 times, I add the second sentence. Once I can do it 3 times, I add the third sentence. And that works for shorter pieces. For longer pieces, what I will do is I will go section by section trying to memorize it, and then sometime around the day before, I will piece it all together and work on it. And what you end up with is a lot of strong sections and then some weak sections. For example, the first few words of a paragraph, or what is the proper transition into the next idea. And before any of that, I really kind of work out the framework. So there's an outline in my head. It goes in this rough order. Here's the order of the paragraphs, or here's the order of the ideas, so that if I'm standing there in front of a candidate, I can hopefully ad-lib something if absolutely necessary. And I know you're supposed to be word perfect and everything else, but I believe that we are not gods. And I believe that getting the idea across in a way that the candidate doesn't recognize the issue and gets the appropriate lesson is perfectly appropriate. And that's a personal view. That does not reflect on the Grand Lodge of the state of Wisconsin or anyone else around me. And I will take my time working through this material. In this case, the middle chamber, I've spent a lot of time studying it. Now I want to be able to give it. And again, I don't expect that tonight I'm going to give a word perfect lecture. What I do expect is that tonight I'm going to be able to walk in there and give a decent lecture. A good lecture. I'm not looking for amazing. I'm looking for good. And maybe if I'm really lucky and the stars align, I'll get it 90%, 95%. But at the end of the day, it's a first step. The first time you give the lecture is not the final product. The final product is the last time you give that lecture, which we never know when that's going to be. This is simply the first step to getting there. I'm going to take in the bulk of the material so that the next time I do it, I can improve on things. The next time I do it, I can look through it again and change some words and change some ideas to better fit what's actually there, and do it over and over again until I get to the point of being near word perfect. I never believe that I actually am word perfect because, well, perfection is something that I don't believe is of this world, is not a human trait. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to return to this episode in 24 hours, tomorrow. Now, for you, that doesn't matter. It's going to be a few seconds. For me, it's 24 hours. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and finish studying this material. I'm probably going to put in, as I said, 4 to 6 hours today. And then I'm going to give it tonight. And we're going to see what the results are. And I'm going to come back and I'm going to honestly report on how it went. If it is a miserable failure and I get pulled with that giant crook that we see in cartoons right off the stage, as it were, then I'm going to tell you about it. If everything went well, I'm going to tell you about it. But I want to humanize this. I don't want us to look at people who lecture as some kind of Superman who can walk out and do these things. I mean, to be fair, Michael Vahulis is kind of a Superman. But leaving ritualists and proficiency men aside, I want to humanize it so that you feel like you can go through this. And to be brutally honest, if I had a regular schedule, I'd probably be working on this over a couple of weeks, put in an hour or two every day or two, maybe just on my commute. Maybe I bring the book with me and I'm kind of working on it in my car, driving, obviously not reading, but working on it as I drive. Many people do. And I will tell you, some of the best ritual would probably work in a drive-in theater based on how much we all practice in our cars. But I will return tomorrow and I will let you know exactly how it went. 24 hours later, here I am. It is about 7 a.m. on May 26th, so I went and did that lecture. And let me tell you, I stumbled all over the first few paragraphs. I got into a rhythm and got things down. I would say it was 85% there, give or take. Now, it's serviceable. It's the sort of thing that got the right ideas across. It didn't do it incredibly well, especially the first section, until I got into sort of a rhythm of things. But a couple of things stood out. First of all, a lot of guys came up to me, hey, nice job. You know, it's like they had completely forgotten that I flubbed some sections. Not badly, but I did. I needed a couple of prompts. And that reminds me that in many lodges, what you tend to see is we'll have someone come up and go, oh, there's these 73 things that went wrong in that lecture. And I need you to go back to your school days for a second here. When you got a paper back, or if I grade a student paper and I mark out all sorts of grammatical errors and issues of citations and issues with argument, etc., and I have 50 different things marked on a page, and yes, it is doable, how much do I actually expect them to come away with? And the answer is maybe 2 or 3 things that they're really going to remember. They'll fix everything, but they're only going to remember maybe 2 or 3. And so if you're going to give someone advice, give them 1 or 2 things, maybe 3. Hey, you missed this paragraph. Hey, there's this. The other thing is you can let them come to you. And as the speaker, as someone learning the lecture, one of the first thing I did yesterday is talk to a couple of brothers after and say, hey, how'd it really go? And they gave me an opinion, which was incredibly helpful. That's how I can start shaping this and changing it. Now, the other thing that I did last night, despite the fact that, 85% I wouldn't be doing this at a day of light or anything like that. But I talked to the master and said, hey, can I do a couple more of these? I know we've got a guy who does them, but can I do a couple more? I just need some repetitions, maybe 2 or 3 more fellow crafts. And they're open to it. That's fantastic. I rather expected they would be. But the purpose of that is it forces me to practice a few more times to get to the point where it's pretty much stuck in my head. And I can start practicing it while driving or in the shower or whatever else. Just sort of rattle through this without needing a cipher next to me to work with it, to constantly look up what's the next word. And where did things fall down yesterday? It fell down with transitional words. Is it inspire? Is it imbue? Is it, which word is it? And sometimes what happened is I would miss the word and I would throw in something that works the same way. To the candidate, they don't notice. To any brother who knows the lecture, they are going to notice. But keep in mind, the entire purpose of the degree is for the candidate, not for us. It is for our self-improvement, definitely. But don't get tied up with perfection. Perfection, as I said before, is not a human trait. Don't get tied up with trying to be word perfect, especially the first time round. Learn it, improve, get better. Even if you get better by 1%, that's fine. That's something. So let's start to wrap this up. So many times I have listened to lectures and I still find them interesting as the first time I heard them. Every time I hear one, I find a new perspective that I previously missed. And I found several when I decided to learn a new one. As for those that give those grand lectures over 20 years, they learn well, and they're not the people who you should try to emulate your first few times through. There's a lecture that I've given for 18 years, 19 years, and I can rattle it off, and it looks very, very different from what I gave last night because I've been doing it so often. And so while you want to work up to a certain level, don't feel like that has to be what happens the first time round. They learn how it feels to give that perfect lecture. They learn rhetoric. They learn the people who are giving those grand lectures over years are learning how to make it sound better. They're learning the arts of rhetoric. They're learning how to deliver something in a way that's going to make it more interesting. They also learn when they do not get it perfectly right. And we can all learn lessons here too. First, how we should avoid over-criticism. And we see that a lot, as I mentioned. I remember certain people in my life who came to me after lectures and told me how absolutely atrocious it was. And if that happens to a newer guy coming in, learning his first lecture, he may not come back for a second shot. Or it may take years before he takes that second shot. So there is a balance. There is a middle way, as we talk about so often. Second, we all need to remember that sometimes the best of intentions can come off wrong by accident, that correction just may not be at the right time or at a time when they are able to hear it. It's kind of knowing the brother who you're offering criticism to. Being a Mason is not simply a series of tasks to be completed by memorizing questions and answers and repeating them one time. It is a lifelong journey towards a perfection that few, if any, will ever accomplish. But we are better men, husbands, fathers, and brothers for starting and continually attempting to complete the walk. Understanding Masonic symbolism and transmitting the lessons of Masonry from the instructive tongue to the attentive ear are the actions that preserve Masonry. We need guys to learn these parts. We need people to listen to the lectures, to understand why we give the lectures, why we memorize them, why we learn them, and the lessons that come out of them. This is a really important part of Masonry. But keep in mind, you need to take it somewhat slowly. You might want to start with a small part. You might want to start with a big part. I did. But that's okay. Everyone starts differently. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter in a year whether this guy started with something very short and simple or something very long and complicated. If they learned it, they learned it. They've done their job. And they've done it presumably well. And by the way, I should note that I ended up using about 12 hours to put things together to get to that roughly 85% for this lecture. And I did all in a few days, as you heard. For you, mileage may vary. You may need longer. But at the end of the day, take the time to learn a lecture. If you already know the lectures, take the time to teach one to someone else, to help them through the process, because how many other times in life are you asked to memorize a couple of pages worth of material word perfect? It's not exactly a skill that we use every day. Thank you for joining me, Brother Chris Lidke, and the entire Further Light team on your quest to find more light through Masonry.
Are you interested in learning more about Freemasonry in Wisconsin? Visit wisconsinmasons.org to learn more about Masonry and access further educational content and more light. Once again, that address is wimasons.org. Any questions, comments, or suggestions, please email us at education@wisconsinmasons.org. And thank you for listening.